You are now welcome to Changes, Google Hangout on air and live on YouTube in the USA. I am Sally Ember, Edd. I'm the host of this hangout. It's called Changes because we like to talk about just about anything related to changes, but also anything else we want. And I have conversations between me and other authors, and today I am delighted to have fellow Midwestern and New Hampshireite Jnana Hodson coming on today. Welcome, Jnana.
Welcome to you too, Sally. We're finally together. My maiden voyage online this way, so we'll see how it goes. I'm a poet, novelist, small press, experimental vein, retired journalist after 40 years of newspaper editing, and I've moved around the country with that, and it all feeds into the experiences and the writing, especially. I like writing that's based on experience. So,
Excellent. Well, you have done a lot of writing. I think you're one of the most prolific authors I've had on my show to date. When I put on the list that you had put in, one of the books I was taking a preview of from your website had a list of your pretty much up-to-date, I'll put it up on the comments, people can see, of your novels and your poetry books, which are collections of poems, and the whole thing isn't showing here, but they can go onto the event page and see it. And then also you have a nonfiction book. It's very impressive. You've been a busy bee. Now, you must have written some of these while you were still employed, yes?
Oh, definitely. It was 40 years of writing. For me as a journalist, one of the frustrations was that writing had to be very direct. You couldn't have multiple meanings. It had to be readable to probably a fourth grade limit level. And that can be very deadening, short sentences and so on. So the writing on the side was both a way for me to explore where I've been in life, what I've been doing, the things in front of me, but also to keep the language alive.
Right.
So I would wind up doing things like in newspaper writing, you almost always use says. Somebody doesn't declaim, they don't shout, they don't scream, they say. So, of course, in a lot of my fiction, if I'll do anything but say. That kind of reaction. But on the other hand, and long sentences or multiple meanings, ambiguities, keep that side alive. But at the same time, I've had the thing of the training of journalism that has to be factually correct. The observation has to be right. Lean sentences, no waste, no editorializing. And so there's been this tension with it, but it's kept me alive as a writer. And a very important part for me was to set aside time every week to be able to write. So over 40 years, it adds up.
Now, did you also keep a personal journal or a diary of some kind that tracked your life? Because it seems to me that you have put a lot of your own biographical details into your characters' experiences.
But journaling has been something. The first editor I worked for, Glenn Thompson, hired me in Dayton. Wonderful, visionary editor at the Journal Herald. Glenn insisted that in his very gravelly voice, you have to keep a journal. And after I graduated from college, I started doing that. And at first he was trying to track what my problem is, the emotional ups and downs, but I found it started to record the ups more than the downs. And there was so much going on that the journals have been very rich sources to go back to. The people I've met, the things I've done, it becomes so easy, a lot of people can remember everything that happens to them. I'm not one of those. I have trouble remembering what happened yesterday. So if I don't journal it, it gets lost. So the journals have been valuable resources.
I have to tell you that I don't have a lot of regrets in my life, although that might shock some people because I've certainly had my share of mistakes. But here's my biggest regret. I had probably a dozen or more journals in my possession that spanned about 25 or 30 years. And when I began practicing Buddhism, which was in the mid-90s, and then moving from the household I'd been in for about 12 years to a Buddhist community, for whatever reason, I decided I didn't want these to be the record of my life. that if I died, people would find these. I was worried about my son finding them or other people in my family who didn't know that I'd been doing all these things or thinking all these things or writing all these things, and I threw them all out.
So we can warn anybody out there who has a journal and has that impulse, do not.
Well, I should have locked them up or made some provision for them not being seen by people after my death, which could happen at any time. I didn't think about that, and now I think about those journals almost every month, like, oh, I bet that was in my journal. I bet I remember. Oh, I would really wish I, gone. It's like I had a fire, only I did the fire.
So we talked about the kinds of moves. What got you into Buddhism?
Well, I actually started meditating because of a boyfriend in high school who introduced me to it, and I actually put a lot of that story into my character's story in my books because I just think it's a great story, and I thought she could enjoy having it and let readers read about it that way. But that was transcendental meditation. The Beatles and I and all the other people in the 1970s were doing that in the early 70s, right? So I did TM, which is what they called it, for twice a day, 20 minutes for 20 years. Almost 25 years. I was really diligent. Even after I had a baby, even when I was working, even when I was traveling, I never missed. And then I got more into other kinds of meditation in the 80s, women's spirit and visualizing and shamanic drumming and other kinds of Eastern modalities that weren't TM, and learned a variety of techniques, but I still felt like I didn't really have a spiritual home. I never was into the Hinduism part of it. I never joined an ashram or went to any of the TM community groups. I just meditated on my own. And then some friends of mine were involved with a Buddhist teacher, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and I respect both of those people very much. And another friend of mine got involved, and another friend, and another friend. And so I was like, all right already. So I went to meet him and his wife and listened to some of the teachings, and I was completely turned off. I just couldn't do it. He was Tibetan. Everything had to be translated. I was just, never mind. And so for 8 years, I still didn't do it, even though they were all doing it. And then one of my friends, who'd been doing it a long time, became authorized to teach by him. And then another friend, and finally the woman that I had known the best became a teacher. And she called me up. She said, you said if I ever became a teacher, you would come. Well, now you have to come. She held me to it. And they actually, she and my friend, and I went to visit in Colorado, they kidnapped me and brought me to a weekend retreat where I learned Red Tara, which is the first practice of our Sangha. And I loved it because it really brought together so much of what I'd already been doing and felt like coming home. And that was 1996, and I've been practicing ever since. And my teacher is now been since 99, Lama Drime, and I practice Dzogchen, which is called the Great Perfection. I've done a lot of individual retreats and short and longer ones. Not the whole 3-year thing, unfortunately, but that's my story. I'm sticking to that story.
It has the commonality of it happens. It opens up. It's not what you usually expect to do. I mean, in college, my girlfriend wanted me to take up TM, and we had a big argument. I was not going to do that mumbo jumbo. And the first person I ever saw meditate, this was the spring of '70. There was somebody sitting under a beech tree in Bloomington, Indiana, not moving for probably a half an hour. What I now realize is perfect zazen. And I had very angry responses to it. I thought, here we are in the middle of Vietnam, he should be out protesting and everything. How can you be, what I saw mortifying himself, turning his back on life? Put the things together later, it must have been Gary Snyder. Just back from Japan, he was doing readings and had an art exhibit on campus at that point, and a major influence in my life. But here it was, a year later, I'm out in upstate New York, and talking to somebody, and said, well, maybe I'll do yoga. And not really meaning to, but maybe it's good. And they said, that'll be good for you. The next day, I'm on campus, and there's a little sign up on the kiosk, way up in pencil, yoga meeting tonight. Bad neighborhood in town, but I figured, okay, I'll go. I went, go 3 flights of rickety stairs, got up there, I walk in, and there's this heavyset woman in a orange jumpsuit. Says, okay, stretch out on your back. So we did exercise. This was not the meeting I expected. And then we got up and sat around a candle afterward. And all I know is I felt stoned after that. but I came back the next week and the next week, and she was the one who had the ashram. Um, so if that's how it goes, it was doing that for a year or so, not that long, 6 months maybe, and I knew, okay, I had this invitation to go. Work was grunt work, copy editing. I quit my job and moved there for a year and a half, and it changed my
Wow.
life. It's living in community. It's living with other people. It's you talk about mysticism. For the reality of it, it's practical. It's down to earth and it's humorous. Whether you're talking to Catholic monks or Buddhist or Quakers, it's all the same. It's everyday stuff, and it just kind of opens your eyes to see what's in front of you.
Hmm.
So here we is.
And so you were living on the ashram and being a part of that community as an individual, as a single man. This is before you had a family.
I had a family. In fact, we can argue if it's possible to have families and children in a situation like that, and I think it would certainly stress it. So that's at least the history.
Hmm. Hmm. And so then you left that and you moved around a bit more. And how did you become a Quaker?
Well, at one point, when I moved back to Bloomington, I realized I had the credentials the leader of the local ashram wanted. So if I went there in any form, there'd be a Dharma battle going on, and I didn't want that. Um, they had their tradition. We were in a different stream. Ours was a Sivananda stream, but we were kind of a maverick outfit, all American. Um, I didn't go to India like some people. No, it kind of came to me. But I needed some place to sit and with community, whether you want to call it Sangha or meeting for worship. And I got involved with the Quakers. And I had no idea at the time that that was the faith of my Hodson ancestors.
Wow.
The beginning of the movement. And but I remember Swami saying that when we got into this, it wouldn't take us away from our original faith, it'd bring us closer to it. So that kind of grew on me. I wasn't planning on leaving the Hindu path at all, but step by step, it's led me into a radical Christianity, an alternative Christianity. So,
But there's still a central figure in your worship or in your spiritual path that includes Jesus?
Jesus, but there's also the idea of Christ, which is closer to the Jewish concept of Sophia.
The divine light or the perfect wisdom?
Or the ancient Greek concept of logos.
Uh-huh.
That's
the oneness of everything, right? The place, the everything.
It's a huge concept. The reconciliation of opposites, the divine plan.
Yeah. In Buddhism, they call it non-duality or ripa, which is awareness.
That fits. That fits.
So that's been your spiritual home now for how long?
Oh, about 40 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. Some people can't even have anything last that long, much less a spiritual path. So good for you.
I think part of it is that there are a lot of places to grow in it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place for social activism, peace and justice concerns, spiritual depth growing. There's a place for children to be, for aging, just basic community itself. And so you kind of move from one base to another within that.
Yep. I know a lot of people that are very involved in the Quaker movement for nonviolence and have been conscientious objectors during war times and draft times, and then other times they've been protesting the wars, or they've been inhabiting those street corners and standing with the women in black. You know about that, right?
I don't know the women in black, but it sounds right.
Well, the women in black started in Israel as a movement of women who would just stand in silence in wearing all black in protest of all the violence between the Palestinians and the Israelis that eventually has blown up to what you know now. But it started decades ago. And so they became visible, usually on Fridays at noon in a lot of places. They would stand on a street corner, just silent, not even holding signs or anything. And then during this horrible time in American history, starting with George Bush Sr., and then continuing with the ridiculous, horrible wars we're having for no purpose at all except to try to grab oil and land and make Halliburton rich, in my opinion, they became counterparted on opposite corners by people who were pro-war. carrying lots of signs and asking people to honk, and honk if you love your soldiers, or honk if you support the troops, or honk if you believe in American superiority kinds of signs, you know. But the women in black were just steadfast, and they never changed what they're doing, and they just go and stand. And so a lot of Quakers joined them, and a lot of other community members who were unaffiliated would join them. And then, like where I lived in California, in Sebastopol, for about 8 years, there were these wars going on kind of between the cars, among the cars that would be driving by, like, who are you honking for? Who are you supporting? You know, well, the Quakers and the women in black never asked anybody to honk, right? So then people started putting their hands out with the peace sign or the thumbs up to show they were on their side, and then all the honkers would honk, and that was for the loud people. And it was just this whole thing that went on every Friday from 12 to 1. It's probably still going on, but I don't live there anymore.
Well, so much of the stories that I try to tell in my array of novels and is and the poems, it's this continuation that there's another way, another awareness, other than the mainstream. I mean, the hippie movement for me was all of a sudden all of the people who've been the outsiders in high school, you know, that ones who weren't the prom queen and king, who weren't the cheerleaders and football stars, varsity lettermen, and so on. All of a sudden, that in-group was the out-group. And all the rest of us were in. And we had the alternatives. It was, if you weren't in uniform, you could be cool. If you were into any, you know, the outdoors, social justice, racial equality, you know, it's a long list before we even get into organic and environmentalism coming up. You could come together, and I look at the hippie movement as a whole series of Venn diagrams.
Yes.
Kind of overlap. You know, you could, even though the centrality of it might have been pot, the pill, and protest, and if you were in any one of those, you were in the hippie movement. It was possible to be in it without even being in any of those.
Sure.
I think of like the ashram. Okay, we were very celibate, no drugs allowed, and so on. That was for me the hippiest time that I had. And it was back to the earth. We were getting into organic before it was organic, natural foods, firewood, our own form of sustainability, teaching, being out there, being outside of the main economic grid. These were visions of what could be. Shared households, which you've had your experience with intentional community more than I have, but it's still, you know, as we're retiring and watching small incomes, it still might be some form that we do. Might not be sharing everything, but hey, here's a house. Let's pool resources to some extent, rather than all winding up in nursing homes.
Well, and that's what gave birth to the co-housing movement, and a lot of other collective living experiments in the 60s and 70s and 80s have now turned into these assisted living communities and other kinds of closed and gated communities that aren't about being rich necessarily, but about having an intention, that are green or political or religious or gay, lesbian, bisexual, or all the Quakers. There's a Quaker assisted living and three-tiered living situation right in Santa Rosa, California, where I used to live. The Friends Meeting House started it, and it's not just for Quakers, but they support it. So I think what you're talking about is very important. I sometimes walk into a grocery store, and I feel so much pride, because when I first was shopping in my early 20s, it did not look like it looks now. But now you walk in and there are organic aisles and gluten-free aisles, and all the soy and almond milk and coconut milk and rice milk takes up a whole aisle, and you've got all kinds of vegetarian and vegan options, and it's very proudly stating that this is, you know, this is acid-free, and this is gluten-free, and this is salt-free, and this is sugar-free, and this is, you know, and none of that was a conscious thing going on in the grocery stores when we were young. And I feel like our generation made that happen. We changed the way people see food and the way we eat. And the anti-GMO movement is an extension of that, to try to bring back purity to our food and try to keep out the pesticides. You know, we helped end DDT. We helped do a lot of really important things in the 60s and 70s and 80s that are still repercussing, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. Just getting on food awareness. When I was growing up, food came out of cans.
Right.
Spaghetti came out of cans. Chinese food came out of cans. Spam, one of our favorites, came out of cans. Um, you know, we do very little out of cans in this household. Um, you think of, I remember watching, when we finally got a TV that had the UHF channels. We could finally get the educational station out of Cincinnati.
Right.
I mean, in black and white, very fuzzy, very all full of snow, but I could watch the Julia Child French Chef program. And, it's funny woman, um, doing her thing, and she would show us these exotic foods, things like artichokes,
Right.
lobsters, croissant. I remember watching, what's this thing? What's all this layering with butter? I mean, that wasn't margarine. This was, Grandma and Grandpa had butter, but we loved it. But at home we had margarine. You go down this whole list of things that she made. They're everyday foods for us.
Yep. No, I never even ate an artichoke. The only time I ever saw one was on the Three Stooges until I was 23 years old. I never had fresh asparagus. I never had fresh spinach. I never had any Brussels sprouts. I didn't even know what they were until I was in my early to mid-20s and living in a collective household with a lot of macrobiotic people who were very food conscious and very tuned into the balance of yin and yang and brown rice. I never heard of brown rice until that. And, all those things came into my life because of these communities that I joined in the late 70s.
Well, we can go into vegetarianism.
Right.
You live in an ashram, you take up yoga, you become vegetarian. And I remember visiting home and, oh, well, if you're not having meat, have the green beans. Well, of course, they're laced with bacon and cooked in bacon fat. And that kind of awareness, but the taste buds opening up and realizing that there's so many other options than the ones that we had. I mean, seafood was one that we didn't have growing up either. I mean, if you had fish, it was fish sticks or maybe something, be coated in cornmeal.
Right, right.
Kinds of discoveries, and you don't have to. The idea of eating local is of course a big thing now, and
yes,
we can. Raw milk was one we were able to get living
yes.
making our own yogurt. Yogurt. Speaking of foods that we take for granted and that were quite exotic.
We made our own kefir.
Your what?
Kefir. You don't know about kefir? Kefir is better than yogurt. Kefir has more of the probiotics than yogurt, and it's a superfood. It's in all the stores now, though. You can walk in almost any store and find kefir, Kefir.
Okay.
It's a dairy food, but for people who are lactose intolerant or lactose sensitive, it's tolerable.
Okay, that's what I learned today in school. But my wife's yogurt is incredible. So.
Well, it's like yogurt. It's a cultured product. So as soon as you have any kefir, you can always make more. You start it with a teaspoon from the old kefir, and you just keep it going. It's like a sourdough starter that gets passed on through the families for generations. You can have kefir forever if you keep it going.
That's part of the revolutionary things that we brought along. You think of home brewing, too, is another one.
Well, exactly. Do it yourself. That's what really came out of all this, was a restoring of the community competence, I guess I would call it, in producing products of all kinds, not just food, but everything.
Oh,
my son's father was an artisan carpenter who learned a lot from the Japanese and had all these Japanese tools and all these old Shaker and Quaker tools from New England that he collected, and he did everything by hand, and he had only 3 electric tools in his whole shop, and they were like a bandsaw and a power drill and something else that was like for really big things, and everything else he did by hand.
That's amazing. I remember one time we have a worship in a 1768 meeting house, the third one for this congregation.
Wow.
We needed more space for classrooms for the children, so we had the whole thing levitated, hydraulic lift. And I remember being outside when that happened, and put a basement in, but we made sure there were windows so there'd be light. But the amazement at how little rot there was. Remember, this building over 200 years old, lifting it up, have little rot because they built it well. But also, one of the engineers there said, we couldn't build this today. We don't know how,
Wow.
you know.
That's
So
sad. That's really sad. Well,
they,
look, I want to bring in before it's too late because it's already almost a halfway through our show. I want to bring in and show people what you have right now on Smashwords and let people know that you have a bunch of self-published items that you're very proud of and that you really want people to know are available. And they can look at your book covers and they can see what you have there and they can be excited about them from that point of view. They can see some of these, or they can go to your website, of course, and enjoy them there. And I guess if you wanted to, as soon as you can see them on the screen, you can talk about whichever ones you want.
well, thank you. I've been very excited by the openings with the self-publishing. Smashwords is certainly a pioneer in this. But for years I've watched what's been happening in the traditional book publishing industry, and it's the consolidation of publishers into fewer and fewer possibilities for fiction, looking at many of the writers that I've enjoyed, loved, admired over the years, coming to the conclusion they couldn't get published today. People like Kerouac, Browdigan, Vonnegut even, that it just becomes bigger, and what they want is one bestseller every term. And that's not the way the industry used to be. There was room for experimentation. Of course, there's always been small press work, but that's been hard to get. It's been expensive. And some of my favorite collections of poetry, for instance, were published as chapbooks. Some of them were actually, chapbooks still exist, but they were mimeographed, as cheaply as you could get. And of course, book publishing has gotten incredibly expensive. You go in and try to buy a hardbound book, say a first edition novel, it's going to be $25. I don't know about you, but I don't have that kind of cash to lay out for somebody. I really don't know if it's going to hold up and so on. But the self-publishing has become so inexpensive to do and to buy. It's opened up this whole new range that we can start to put out other kinds of work today. And there's incredible stuff coming out, as you well know.
Yeah, definitely. And you've had this incredible range of items that you've published, I guess I would call them, different kinds of genres that you write in, and including nonfiction and poetry as well as fiction. Now, do you also do short stories?
Not really. I admire the form. I just haven't had time to play with it the way I would like to.
Okay.
I had a professor, really a mentor in college, Vincent Ostrom, who political science, but we would work through classics in the field and build the logic in them and tease them apart. How much could you relax and add to? And surprisingly, a lot of this has worked with my approaching literature. He and his wife were just an incredible couple. I wound up going back to work for them for a year and a half. She was a political scientist, and years later she won the Nobel Prize in Economics.
Wow.
I was her editor, kind of working in a wonderful experience. But in their home, he had helped write the Alaska Constitution. So when he was up there, he got to know a lot of the native cultures. And he had wonderful little pieces of carvings, soapstone carvings. They were wonderful to feel. And they got into the calendars, the Inuit calendars, before they were really popular, introduced me to that. And one of the things he mentioned was that an Inuit artist, say that there's a statue of a standing bear. That's the only standing bear he will ever carve. He carves another bear, it might be resting or what. So you do something once. So for me, every novel is going to be different. Every collection of poems should be different. Even when I take the same story, I took in Hippie Drum, the main character, he comes out of Daffodil Sunrise, he comes east, and we have this image of the hippie era of nothing but a lot of sex, Maybe you knew somebody who'd come home with a different partner every night. I can think of one. But more often it was a monogamous relationship, long term, um, or you weren't getting any. And he was that kind. He's looking for love again, but it's constantly eluding him. And the next novel, I rewrote the novel, changed the point of view. It became hippie love. Instead of missing, he waits another moment. Their eyes connect. They say the right word. They connect. It still goes the same way. They break up. They get, he finally finds the love that works. And it was a real interesting experiment. And you can do that with self-publishing. You couldn't do that with commercial publishing. It would be too expensive.
That's really true. That's really true. Or they'd argue you out of doing it. They would give you all the reasons why it's a bad idea. And, oh, you confuse your readers, or that just doesn't work, or we've never done that before, blah, blah, blah.
So it's a lot of fun.
Do you have a poem? I'm not going to ask you if it's representative, but do you have a poem that would do well to be read aloud by the poet that you'd like to share with us that would take, less than a few minutes?
Oh, certainly. I did a poetry reading down in Newburyport 2 weeks ago, and it was a lot of fun. I tried to do an overview of my work, but we haven't gotten to that topic of place, which is very big for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came to New England, of course, it was so different from any place else I'd lived, that we have so much history here. And I love those kind of calendars that are the place, like a lighthouse calendar, a different one every time, or there's certainly a lot of them in New England. I started getting into that. And we decided to try to put my thinking together of not just a set of poems that would be an almanac month by month, but not just of now, but you have these centuries overlapping and experiences. So this one was, since the reading was actually in February, it's called More February Exiles.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to do something unusual. I'm going to ask you to hold the book up so that your voice goes right into the microphone. And keep your face up so we can really hear you, okay?
Like this?
Yeah, that sounds great.
A ring-necked pheasant skims waist-deep snowpack. A barred owl crowns a 4 o'clock fence post. With a band of spectral Abenaki entreating us with petitions and grievances, you redeem lunatic multicolored bills about to waft across window panes in the earth. Perhaps I've been entwined with an invisible lover, more accurately, multiple caprices, movements of the breast, so we fancied. Headstones and footstones become price tags to mark down. Vanity and necessity have their price. That is to say, 1 feather bed and 2 pillows, 3 blankets, 1 coverlet, 2 pair of sheets, 2 pillow burrs, 2 towels, 1 basin, 1 candlestick, 1 chamber pot. In the fantasy I never speak, there's no need. Menfolk in rubber boots hoist 2-handled saws and long poles to their shoulders. Soon at the mill pond they cut wagon-sized cubes for oxen to skid to the ice house. Their teamwork is layered in sawdust. A tract promises hope. She promised salvation. Alone in the forest I fell firewood for next winter. Reflect before town meeting. Adjust the gap in new spark plugs.
Wow, that has a lot of different imagery in it. I almost couldn't keep track of it all. So vivid. Thank you so much for sharing that. I could picture so much of that going on, and the phrase that really grabbed me was the one with the word lunatic in it with colors. What was that phrase?
Let's see.
It's near the beginning.
Right, talking about the Indians who we don't see in New England. They're kind of in the background of history, with a band of spectral Abenaki entreating us with petitions and grievances. You redeem lunatic multicolored bills about to waft across window panes in the earth.
Ah, yeah. Wow. And then there's that theme that comes up in a lot of men's poetry, I have to say. And it's come up in some women's too, but only when they're lesbians. And it has to do with the woman who is the object of lust or love or sexual attraction becoming the source of salvation. What is that about? I don't get it.
Oh boy, we could go on.
Can you explain that in a PG-13 manner, please?
Well, yeah, I think part of it has to do with emotions. Women become the core of emotional life. Men traditionally have had to deny that side of themselves. You know, you go off to war, you go out to force to work, you're dealing out of the house. And the woman represents the domestic, the home that you return to, the caring, the family, and all that's emotional and deep and spiritual in that. Um, you know, in the very Orthodox Jewish tradition, the women don't go to temple. It's the men who go to shul because we need it. We need to open ourselves up. And whether that you want to buy that argument or not, um, I think the woman often becomes the goddess.
Okay, so the woman becomes the surrogate or the vehicle for the other, whether that's a male or female lover, to access their spiritual or religious feelings, emotional side, whatever that is.
I would think so. Now, again, this is tentative. It's soft ground to tread on, but yeah, I think look at figurative painting too. You know, the woman is far more interesting as a model, and I have this from good artists on good tradition than the male figure.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily accurate because what you're talking about is from the male perspective. And if you talk to female artists, they would say that both bodies are interesting and they could find interesting aspects in any body. And it doesn't have to be a feminine point of view or a masculine point of view to appreciate any form. But most of the famous artists were men. And so you see them gazing at women, using women as objects. But that doesn't mean women were superior as forms. I think that would be a mistake to make that assumption.
Well, I'm
Certainly
thinking,
Michelangelo didn't agree.
well, true, true. Anytime we have these kind of generalizations, but you know, part of it's the mystery. For me, one of the great mysteries when we get into the whole argument, gay, lesbian, straight, so the mystery of why we are attracted to the people we are attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why? Nobody can give you a real answer on that, other than
Right, but they're getting closer. I saw this posting yesterday in a scientific part of my news feed where they now have functional MRIs and PET scans and other things that make your brain light up in colors and all that, and they can claim now that they can say which people are in love, which people have just broken up and are heartbroken, which people have never been in love, by which parts of their brains are lit up and how much of them are lit up.
I don't know. I don't think it's my brain at all. You know?
Well, you know, you're right about that because Candace Pert, who wrote a book called Molecules of Emotions, she talks about how your emotions are permeating your entire body, and every cell in our body has an emotive component. It isn't just in your heart, your stomach, your lungs, your brain. It's not in any one place. It's everywhere. And in fact, now they're showing that your gut actually is the repository or the generator of almost all of our emotional, physical, or biological content. It comes from inside of our intestines and our stomach.
That's where the Zen Buddhists center their meditation, isn't it? The belly button.
Sometimes in the hara, yeah, in the Eastern form, but in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's in the heart, or just below the heart,
Okay.
in a special place where the bindus meet. That's a whole other topic, but you're right. I mean, physiologically, there's not any agreement on where everything resides.
Gee, we could go off on chakras now, but I think we won't.
We could, and then all different versions of where they are and what they do and how many there are and everything like that. Nobody agrees. And everybody thinks they're right. What form of yoga did you learn first? What was it called?
First one was Hatha yoga, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And the ashram I was in was very big on karma yoga, or we were known as a boot camp. And of course, it had its own evolution, starting out as a spa retreat, pay what you will, and you know, people would come and they'd have no money, and then tell us about this great dope they bought last week. And we started to put some limits on it, and you know, there were different levels you could come at, but you know, the financial realities in it. Yeah,
My
The
my sister is a Bikram yoga, hot yoga teacher in the Chicago area. Laurie Fleischman Stern, shout out to her yoga, and she teaches at a lot of different studios. And that's the kind where you move really fast, and you're in a hot room, and you go through a series of poses. But you can hold some poses too, you know. But it's always in a hot room, like you're really supposed to sweat. That's all part of
we had summer for that, and
it.
you know, we were really very simple, down to earth. Um, the Hatha was Swami Sivananda influenced, of course, Vishnu, Devananda, and Satchidananda really brought a lot of the Hatha yoga into this country.
Now, for
But
those people who aren't Sanskrit friendly, let's just tell people that Ananda means bliss, and all those other front parts are different parts of names that also have meanings, right?
right, right, Satchidananda was truth and light and bliss, so coming together. Vishnu was the god Vishnu with devotion and bliss. But Hatha was the physical exercises. Karma was to try to, that was the action. Raja is meditation, which was really the whole point of doing those was so you could sit better. And then you would get bhakti, love. You know, it's said there are 180,000 gods in India, probably more than that, but there are probably as many forms of yoga. I'm baffled by all the names I see now, the local yoga studios. You just do it. So,
It's true. There are a lot of reasons to do it different ways, though, and there are also forms of movement and postures and poses that you would call yoga in Tibetan Buddhism as well. But the word yoga just means path, so
or,
it could be anything.
or union.
Or union, right? And so you have this capacity to create a form for people to utilize in order to find non-duality and to rest in it, to abide in it, is what we call that, you know?
Whatever we want to call it, peace, bliss, love.
Mm-hmm.
It's an alternative to what we see in the dog-eat-dog world, the highly competitive, the social strata, the constant game, everybody trying to get rich at the expense of other people.
Yeah, yeah,
But
that whole competition and capitalism thing, that's really the worst parts of humanity, I think.
we certainly see it. There's, again, come back, there's an alternative. We just have to find it.
Well, this is a perfect entree to our next part of our show, which usually comes at about a quarter of the hour, and it's the time that I use to ask each of my wonderful guests to pontificate or use this platform to speak about your take on changes. So I'm going to ask you that big question, and you zero in on whatever parts you'd like to speak to, Jana. The question is, given all the local, personal, regional, global, political, social, national, climactic, spiritual, and any other kinds of changes you're aware of, which ones arouse in you hope or fear? Which ones do you want to speak about right here today? Take it away, Jnana Hodson.
Wow, as if anybody has the cure for the situation we're in. Um, could start with the environmental situation. One book says this changes everything. If we don't solve this, we can forget about all of our other problems. It's history, and it can be paralyzed with fear because there's so things are changing so quickly here for the negative that we need to do something. You feel like we can't do anything now, and yet small steps are happening, and it's not going to happen from the top down. It's not going to happen. As one friend, Steve Curwood, does a program on public radio, this Planet Earth, and he says this is the story today, and I believe him. He says we can't try to argue dollars and cents in Congress because it's not going to work. What we have to argue is this is a moral issue, that if we don't come to grips with the energy and our abuse of the land, we're all fried. We're all in this together. If you want to talk equality, this is it. But yet we see the small steps happening. You drive across Vermont now, Vermont of all places, and you see farms of solar panels. Now, New England is not the best place in the world to put solar panels up. So if it works here, it's incredible. You think about nuclear energy is not the way to go because of the huge impact. You know, what do you do for thousands and thousands of years while it um, really, the real danger of the nuclear industry is it's not for energy, it's for weapons. So let's take that all off the table. But
And
when
for the waste, what to do with the waste?
the waste is the real problem, and it's not calculated into the cost of the energy. And of course, fracking is another problem. Electricity, though, I drive from here to Portsmouth. It's about 10 miles, and we go across a bridge. We have this wonderful estuary here in the seacoast area of New Hampshire. About a third of the fish in the East Coast, I'm told, have some kind of roots with this. But the mouth of this into the Piscataqua River, which goes then right into the ocean 5 miles away, the current is always incredible. If you can harness that, you could probably power 500,000 homes. I mean, it's just incredible energy that we don't yet know how to. The wind, we're starting to do the wind farms. We won't. The next step is not even the propellers. You know, the propellers that they're looking at are 90 to 120 feet long for a lot of, and they're beautiful when they're up there. Gloucester, Mass. has 3 of them out on Cape Ann. Next time you're in New England, take a look. They're spellbinding to watch. But the next one are not the ones that go this way. They're going to go this way, and you climb on the roof of the big house, and you don't get the vibration this way then. So we're on the verge of things like this, but we have to be able to take the step. And you know, you're seeing it happen. Okay, the Prius is not, the hybrid cars are not the answer yet, but it's a step closer. And the fact you can be that free from petroleum is a huge step. We get into the energy problem. Without the oil imports, we avoid a lot of the Middle East conflict that we're in, where we're trapped to the addiction. So something like half of the amount of oil that we import is the amount the military needs for its global operations. I'm sitting here kind of thinking, well, wait a minute. What if we cut off the military end of it? We don't need to import it, but maybe that's too radical. So we've got the energy problem, but we also have a whole changing economic system. The corporate system, corporate capitalism as we know it, is a dinosaur, and it's collapsing. You can go back and look at the top 500 companies that existed when we were growing up, and a lot of them are gone. AT&T is no longer AT&T. It was another one of the baby bells that spun off and then bought the name for it. Think of Xerox, Kodak, Bausch and Lomb. I mean, even upstate New York, where you have these incredible companies. Go down the list. Something is happening. I'm not sure where it is. We can start with the argument, what if we have enough stuff now? You know, my wife and daughters are great at yard sailing. This is a nice region to do it. But, you know, why pay $300 for an Irish knit sweater when you can find it for $2 at a yard sale? I feel a lot better about spilling coffee on that one than at the unused version. But, you know, again, presence, kind of change of outlook. You know, traditionally you give people stuff. They don't have any place to store it. You know, they're adults that have everything they really need. Give them something they can use up. So that's one change. Of course, that's before we get into all the economic redistribution. The idea of meaningful work, I think, fits into this. What Gary Snyder calls the real work, or the poet Donald Hall talked about his division of, he's got a wonderful set of essays called Work Life, or maybe it's Life Work. But at any rate, he lays out the thing between work, jobs, and chores. And work is what really energizes you. You know, when you're writing and it's happening, that's work. Doesn't mean you're going to get paid for it, but there's a certain love that happens in it. Job is not necessarily work and job go together. Job is what you do to pay the bills. And of course, chores is what you do around the house to keep or other places to keep everything running. You don't get paid for those. It says if you're really lucky, you manage to get your work and job are the same. They're one and the same. You're doing something that you love and you're getting paid for it. And so he says he's been really lucky that way. But for a lot of us, as I've watched the current economy, they're separated work and jobs and turn things that work this combined into jobs. You know, it's this corporate thing. The local bank used to be owned by the people down at the corner. The president of the bank was somebody in the community. He knew everybody. He could combine work, the love of community, and dealing with people with the job that paid the bills. Now it's a branch manager who reports to a vice president someplace along the line, who reports to another kind of vice president up the line, finally gets to a president who reports to another vice president, and this is a subsidiary, reports up the line. Nobody can make a decision anymore. Mm. You know, and everybody's a cog rather than a human functioning in this. And this is part of the change I see happening. It's going to happen with the economy one way or another. I just don't know where it's going to land.
Well, I think what you're talking about is really important because it's the decentralization that leads to the impersonalization and the lack of connection, really.
Exactly.
And the outcomes or the impact of what people do decide is so far removed from their personal experience that they not only don't take responsibility, they don't feel accountable. They never even see what their decisions cause.
Exactly. And you've seen this in small towns across the country, that their local factory is closed, that they don't care what happens. They don't care about the quality of local education. They're not invested in the community. And that's the way it used to be. You know, the local newspaper, the public was owned by the local family, and the publisher was part of the community. Again, you have the same, it's across the thing, the supermarkets, all of it. But there's something else happening. This alternative, I think, I'd like to think part of it's the hippie legacy, but we'll see how it shakes out. But the other just can't keep continuing the way it has, and that's before we get to the political scene. You know, where you pay to play. You know, as the term is now, the big money running the politics. At some point, we've got to rise up and say, "Hey, the guy who's got all the money is the guy we vote against."
Well, in my books, I have this whole change go on that has to do with aliens revealing themselves, having been here for millennia. They finally decide that we're in such a mess that they have to become visible and obvious, and that we have to join the many worlds collective or we're going to destroy ourselves. And part of what happens is this political change where no one who is currently a leader is allowed to continue, and no one who volunteers is allowed to become a leader.
That's brilliant.
I thought so.
Yeah. Now, in the Amish and Mennonite communities, the minister is not somebody who's trained for the leadership there, but they watch people they think have the skills, and they pick out 5 or 6 who might take that position, but then they essentially cast lots for it.
Oh, that's nice.
The lot fell on somebody. The responsibility. Ideally, you'd rather not do that, but you step up to it. And it's a whole different thing than, you know, setting yourself up in the pulpit.
Well, yeah, the idea that somebody would want that leadership is already a mark against their character, in my opinion, because it has to do with self-aggrandizement and ego pumping and all kinds of other arrogant pride problems that aren't really what we want in leaders.
Right. One of the things I love in Quaker leadership, you remember, when we do our business sessions, we never take a vote. It has to be unanimous. And trying to sense that when there are differences is a fascinating process. You start to realize that, okay, both sides might be right, or they both might be wrong, but there's a third way that might combine the best of it. And to watch that emerge is wonderful. But the leadership is also an interesting thing that we call our leaders clerks because it's like clerk of court. We figure historically it was Christ sits over us, God sits over us, and has the decision. We just have to find it. listen for it. Um, but the beauty of the clerks rotate. You might be clerk of the head of meeting for 3 years, but it's like watching the wild geese. One goose doesn't stay at the head of the line. They're always rotating in there and watching. You step down, step aside, and somebody else steps up, and it's a wonderful one. You support them, you work with them. It's a beautiful process when it works. So there are other forms of leadership than the ones that we see all the time.
Well, and the geese metaphor is really important because the reason that they keep trading places is that the goose who's at the head of the line is the one who's going to be the most severely affected by the wind. And if they leave one goose at the head of the line, that goose will die. It's just too much to be buffeted by the wind all the time. They have to take turns or all of them will be too injured to fly. So they timed it out, and they know about the wind, and they know how long to keep somebody there. And it's this incredible, elegant dance. Have you ever seen them change their formation? It's just amazing. They all know where to be, and they figure it out.
So you want to adapt that for humanity.
Yes, because I think it's true that if you leave someone in a position of leadership for too long, they get buffeted by all the different forces that are around, that all the negativity and all the dissension and all the arguing and all of the problems. And you can see it. You can see it in these leaders who, like our own presidents who do more than 4 years, you watch them and you watch their hair go grayer and grayer and grayer. And it's not just age. You see it in their face. They get all this distress, all these lines of stress and worry. It's a terrible job to be in that high level of leadership for too long. And I personally think 8 years is too long. But then 4 years maybe isn't enough, especially if they think they're running again. So our whole system is broken. That's my opinion. That's why in my Spanners series, we just need to change it up. That's my theory.
That's fascinating. The whole point we can get to with the presidency, and it's just not presidents, CEOs. We didn't have CEOs when we were growing up. They were the president of the company.
It's true.
But
well, look, we could change the world and fix it all we want in our little talk, but we only have 3 minutes left. So before we get too off on a great topic, I want to give you a chance to tell people where to find you and what's coming up for you in the way of new releases or appearances and anything else you'd like people to know that would lead them to your writing and your work. I'm going to put your websites up here while you talk. So tell us about your upcoming projects and things.
Well, sadly, like you, I'm an avid blogger. I didn't expect to get into it this heavily. I thought I would be doing essentially a writer blog or writer website so people could find out how to pronounce my name for one thing. And my elder stepdaughter said, hey, she laughed at me actually. She said, you don't want to get into all the coding for a website. Why don't you get a blog? So I found out, looking at other writers' websites, Jonathan Lethem has a wonderful one. And he put a lot of his older writing up there, things he did for Subway magazines and stuff that were handed out. And that kind of led me to the Jnana's Red Barn. We have an old, call it a carriage house, but that sounds pretentious. But I like the idea of how a barn is a repository. You go up and you go through the top of it and you can find all kind of stuff. So that's been my primary outlet, the blog Jnana's Red Barn. But that also led me to put up some other blogs. One of them is Thistleflinch. And that is a place I'm putting up, every month I'm putting up a new book in PDF format. It's free, but it's one way to get things out and in circulation. So if you want to see what I'm writing, go to Thistleflinch. Originally it was going to be Thistlefinch, and I found out that there were a couple companies using that name. So I decided, okay, you touch a thistle, you flinch. So that's one place. The novels and one collection of poetry at smashwords.com are available on a variety of platforms. So if you're a digital reader, you can get a PDF, but you can also get it for your Kindle, your Sony app, your Apple, go to the Apple Store and so on. So those are out there. But I got such a backlog of writing, just getting it out is such a release. Of course, I do have another novel in percolation right now, don't we always? But I'll save the details on that. But
okay, well, let me just spell out a couple of those things for people that are listening or for our future podcast. Jnana Hodson is Jnana HODSON.net, and all of his other websites are listed there. So you can go there first and find all his other ones. He has a genealogical website, a website of all his books, a website of blogs, a website where he interviews authors. He's a very busy guy. And then you can also go to his Smashwords or Amazon sites and see a lot of other works there. And I want to thank you, Jnana, for coming on today, because we're coming to the end of our hour. And I want to remind people that you can watch Changes on YouTube or Google+. If you're watching this after it's been live, thank you for coming. And thank you for watching. If you did watch live, we had one person who said hello at the very beginning, and then not anyone else who's been watching said anything, but thanks for Becky Limo for coming by and saying hi. And anyone else in the future, thank you for watching, and please comment or send us comments. SallyEmber.com is my website, and you can see upcoming episodes listed, and past episodes URLs are there too. And our next week's guest is Francis Connors, sometimes known as Fran, and he, among other things, is a screenwriter, my first one on the show. So I'm excited about his coming on next week. That's March 25th, 2015 at 10 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. I want to thank everybody for visiting, and thank you again, Jnana. Do you want to thank anybody?
Thank all of you for come by the blog and look at the novels, and it's that's the whole point, is communicating, and love it. Thank you very much, Sally.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you, and thanks to all our viewers. And as I say at the end of every show, go well with your changes. Have a good week.